I fell for the yoga teacher. I wasn't sure what this week was, but I was growing desperate to bask in the presence of one particular man. It could be for whatever reason, but I like to lie to myself that it was because Chris was a patient instructor. I'd never been around someone so peaceful in my life, so I desperately sought his presence, even when I told myself otherwise. Sam, my best friend, had asked me to join yoga classes out of all the damn classes in the world to nurture my mind and calm my chakras, and I accepted the offer without much protest, and I could see why his interest was so apparent in attending these classes. "Can you be a gentleman?" I hissed at Sam when he kept ogling a woman. "She wants me to ogle her," he said, but turned around when I glared at him. "She doesn't," I replied. "You're making her uncomfortable. Listen," I added and looked around the room for a familiar face. The same face who brought in discipline and calmness in the otherwise chaotic room. I was wondering if you'd come to my place for dinner. You know, Lizzie's cooking. "I'm sorry, man. I'm busy." I glared at him. "It's fucking Sunday," I reminded him. "You're free today?" "I just don't want to be around your Lizzie, alright? She creeps the hell out of me." He shivered a little as if suddenly reminded of a creepy encounter with the mentioned lady. "You need to get rid of that woman if you really want to see the benefits of yoga, Liam. She's a horrible woman." "Am I really gonna have to cut you out of my life? Why do you hate her so much?" "Start paying attention, and you'll know why." Before I could answer, a thin figure walked in front of the room and clapped his hands together. It was Chris. Sam elbowed me. I tried to play normal by patting my head. The blush was rising to my cheeks, and I didn't want anyone to get the wrong impression. "Guys, now we begin." And so it began. There was so much about my life that I wasn't sure how to explain. I was 28, doing well for someone my age, and had a girlfriend. When things got particularly stressful between Lizzie and I, and at work, Sam suggested I join yoga classes. He said it'd be fun. After all, it wasn't like I was doing anything to solve any worldly issue, right? I could start with myself. So I did. I followed his advice. And then I came across Chris. Now, this was where the trouble started. It wasn't like I immediately wanted to absolve my relationship with Lizzie and start chasing after my married yoga instructor. No. But things weren't easy either. For one, the relationship between Lizzie and I felt awkward as hell, and as if it was treading on thin thread, if that made any sense. The worse things became at home, the more I sought after peace outside my home, and Chris happened to be the sanctuary of just that. The conflict at home was the precise reason why I wanted Sam to accompany me to the dinner that Lizzie was making. If she was gonna add poison to my food, I'd rather Sam not suffer from the survivor's guilt. See, I was such a great best friend. When she greeted me at home, she was not smiling. She asked me to change and then started piling food on my plate. There was little to no communication between us. She didn't even say why she planned this dinner in the first place. I tried to push for a conversation, but she easily dodged it by saying she was tired from work. "Okay," I told her, "I'll do the dishes." "Thanks, Liam," she said, and left. I sat in that same spot for the next 10 minutes and stared at the closed door for another 5. I realized that my romantic life was just a mess like that. What was I gonna tell my mom? I shook my head and sucked in a breath. I did my part and cleaned everything. When I got in the bed, Lizzie faked snoring. When I settled a little away from her and got comfortable, she got comfortable on her side and breathed softly. "If you're still up, Lizzie," I said with a heavy heart, "my team's handling a new project, so next few weeks I'll be a little late." "How late?" she suddenly asked. "I can't say how much, but, just later than usual." "Okay," she replied and snuggled into the comforter. "Good night, Liz," I said. She did not answer. I really wanted to escape this. 2 days later, Sam asked if I wanted to go out and have a drink. I voiced my thoughts that it was a bit early for booze. He called me a little shit and said drinking didn't always mean alcohol, and so we were out drinking coffee. "Maybe it's just not working out," Sam began. "I'm trying, Sammy," I said and neatly folded the napkin. "It's been only, a year? Break up with her." I glared at him. 1 year is a long time, okay? It can change people. "Then change," he hissed and looked through the window. "I see Chris," he said. "Where?" I asked and followed his gaze. I did find Chris, but he looked like he was in a hurry. He was walking into the supermarket, so I assumed it was probably for groceries. Should we go and help?" Sam was nodding long before I finished my sentence. Go, go! Well, what about you? I asked, a little baffled when he started pushing me out the door. He looks worried, go help him. Before he could humiliate me any further, I shrugged his hands off me and made my way to the supermarket. I couldn't ever understand why Sam insisted on me to be around Chris so much. He was a married man, for God's sake, and I have a girlfriend. I found Chris struggling to grab olive oil from the top shelf. I nearly gave a little laugh, but held it in. Chris wasn't exactly a short man, so I assumed it was probably because of the old wound he had. He said sometimes hurt him a lot. So instead of doing or saying anything stupid, I decided to just help him out. I was supposed to be a polite student, not a jerk. Hey, I said after grabbing a few packets of cookies. Oh, hey Liam, how you doing? Good, I replied, and then grabbed the glass bottle for him. Here you go. Thanks, he replied and put it in his cart. The wound's acting up again? I asked and pointed at it. To keep up my charade, I picked up a few more snacks. Is it okay? It does in winters, he softly smiled and grabbed a few other items. I could see how softly his hair fell over his eyes, and for some stupid reason, I wanted to brush it away the same way I often brushed aside Lizzie's, only I didn't have the guts or the right to do so. So I distracted myself and focused on looking for stuff that Lizzie might want. I found ice cream. I grabbed two and turned to Chris. He looked curiously at me. Come on, let's have a little fun, I said. I have to go home, he replied. I'll drop you off so that you don't get too late. No worries. Let's eat? He sighed with a little smile. All right. Yeah? I grinned. The drive to Chris's place was silent. He didn't speak much, but kept touching and checking his phone. I hadn't noticed any calls on his phone, so I assumed it wasn't that late. When we arrived in his driveway, he sat still for some time. His eyes were fixed on the lit rooms of his home. Is everything all right? I asked. Yeah, he said. He turned to me with a smile. For some reason, it didn't look as peaceful and soft as the earlier ones I'd received. Thanks for driving me, Liam. Yeah. He got off and I helped him with his groceries. Good night, Liam. Good night. I called after him and waved, even though he never looked back. I sighed and left for my home. The next day, Chris arrived later than usual for the classes. My shift had nearly ended and my office was about to begin. Even though I wanted to stay and attend his classes, Sam pushed me out and reminded me of my project. I hated Sam for reminding me of my responsibilities at that moment. Come on, man. Work, 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 die, man. No man hates me as much as my best friend hates me, I said. Yeah, and I don't have a bit of shame about it, he said as he ordered a taxi. How did the meeting between you two go last evening? What do you think? I asked and got into the taxi. It was good. He has a husband, Sam suddenly began. His name's Lucifer. Looks like an idiot. I don't like him. How do you know his husband? I asked, a little confused. Everyone knows his husband, Sam answered. He's almost always there to pick up Chris. It's actually kind of weird. It's almost like he treats Chris like a child. Okay, I said, let's stop complaining. I didn't want to feel any more intrigued by Chris than I already was. It was trouble. Of course, it was then that I found Lizzie cheating on me. It was Friday of the same week. I'd told Lizzie that I'd be late on more days than one because of that single essential project my team was handling. But the discussion ended early, and the conclusions were reached early as well. So, I was on my way home earlier than usual. So I walked inside and saw the littered clothes all over the floor leading to our shared bedroom. I knew what was inside. Even then, I opened the door and saw it with my own eyes. I didn't say a word, but when they noticed and started screaming and crying, I opened the door wider and stretched out a hand, indicating they should leave. I didn't see the man's face. My eyes were completely fixed on Lizzie. She looked guilty as charged and tried to reason with me. I only told her that she could have her items the next day. She asked where she would go. I answered, with her lover. When she finally walked outside, I closed the door on her face. 25 minutes later, with my numb mind, I left my home and roamed around the deserted streets of my neighborhood. The next morning, it was Chris who found me sleeping outside the yoga institute. I was cold to my bones and had nearly died. He looked worried as hell and nearly dragged me inside the place. I was a little lost when he asked if he needed to call the doctors. He checked my pulse and pressed the back of his hand on my forehead. I'll make you something to warm you up, he said. There must be something in the pantry. Let me see. You stay right there. He pushed me and covered me with whatever items he could find in the cupboard at the institute. I want to leave, I told him. He patted my cheeks. Because my skin was cold, it almost felt like little slaps. It irritated me, but not as much as the thought that I was being miserable in front of the person with whom I didn't want to feel miserable. "Don't die on me, Liam," he said. "Stay here. I'll return soon." And so I waited. 1 hour or so later, Chris returned and told me that Sam was looking for me. I asked him to lie about me and switched off my phone. There were 5 missed calls from Lizzie and 24 messages that I couldn't care less about. I'd seen her with another man, and there really couldn't have been any other explanation than the obvious. "He won't bother you, just tell him you didn't see me coming here today." "Are you sure?" Chris asked. "He's your friend, maybe you guys should talk." No, it's alright." Then I sat against the wall and stared ahead. I don't want to see anyone. I don't want to talk to anyone. "Okay, Liam," he softly said. "Do you want something to drink?" "Warm water will do, thank you." He nodded. "Alright, I'll bring it. You rest up." I thanked him, but kept my eyes fixed ahead. I wasn't exactly in pain, but slightly offended. I could think of all the times my friends and family had warned me about Lizzie. Their reasons varied, but their conclusion was always the same. She wasn't the kind of person you should settle down with, and I just didn't get that. Oh, how embarrassing was that? Now, how would I go and explain this to my family? To Sam? I groaned. I could feel an incoming headache. I pressed my hands to my temples and hoped that it wasn't a potential migraine. I couldn't deal with that kind of stuff right now. Chris returned soon, and not only with water. I asked Connor to bring you soup. You should drink it. It tastes pretty good. "Oh," I said. My headache was a bit tolerable now. "I don't know. A simple thank you would go a long way, Liam." He smiled and gently placed the tray in front of me. I blushed. "Thank you, of course. I'm sorry." "It's alright," he said, and stood up. "I should go now. My class." "Yes, of course. Thank you again." "You can talk to me if you want," Chris said in the evening. The last of the batch was leaving, and he had returned to pack his stuff as well. I watched him fold his mat neatly. He placed it on the counter and sat down on a chair in front of me. "I don't know where to begin," I confessed, a little miserably. I felt a little ashamed as well for crying for a cheater of all people, but nothing that I couldn't swallow. "It's alright, there's always time." "My girlfriend cheated on me," I said. Chris sat up straighter. "Last night, I returned home and I saw her with a stranger on my bed. I honestly didn't know what to do, so I just asked them to leave. Then I drank a little and ended up at your door." "And how do you feel?" "Like a pathetic little man," I answered honestly. "I'm upset, but not as much as I'm supposed to be. It's almost like some part of me was waiting for this to happen." "You're only supposed to feel things at your pace," Chris said. I nodded. "And I don't feel sorry at all," I said. "In a way, I'm glad that it finally ended, even though I'm bitter as hell that it had to end like this." I crossed my hands and looked at him. "Have you ever been cheated on?" Chris looked a little uncomfortable and grave at the question. "No," he answered, his voice a little stiff. He rubbed his hands together and looked away from me. Gone was the peace radiating off of him. It was almost as if that single question had sucked out whatever energy he had in him. "But I know how it feels to live with—" He stopped and shook his head. "Do you want to go out with me? Not like that, but, just a stroll, maybe?" "No, Lucifer's actually about to come pick me up." He grabbed his bag when his phone rang. "Come on, I need to lock the place," he said to me. I gathered my courage and stood up. "Hello?" he said into the phone and then disappeared into another room. I soullessly followed after him, but immediately perked up when I realized I was going to see his husband for the first time, and the moment I saw him, I wanted to take back my emotions. Sam was right. Lucifer looked like a nasty piece of a man. Even before he opened his mouth, I could imagine the loads of nastiness burned in his soul. He looked like the kind of man who cared only for himself. How someone like Chris was with him, I wouldn't know. "This is Liam," Chris said, and introduced me to his husband. "Hi," Lucifer said in a gruff voice, and draped an arm around Chris. "What are you doing here, Liam, at such a late hour?" "Oh, I was just leaving," I replied, a little confused and on alert. "It's alright, he just broke up with his girlfriend," Chris said, and patted Lucifer's arm. "Let's go, it's getting late." "Okay," the man replied and got into the car. Chris waved me goodbye and got in as well. I watched them go and wondered if it was possible to know the state of someone's relationship by the way that they behaved in public. Because if what I observed was correct, even slightly, Chris needed to stay the fuck away from that man. The next day, Sam knocked at my door and asked me to let him in. I did. So you're telling me you broke up with your girlfriend, nearly drank yourself to death, and ended up outside the yoga class of all places? Sam asked, sounding genuinely pissed. I shrugged. I suppose. Are you even listening to yourself? Are you not hurt, Liam? You just broke up. I'm pissed off, Sam. I rubbed my arms together and started chopping the vegetables again. I want to go to her parents and tell them everything I saw. Then they'll know how hurt I am. But I don't even want to see her face right now, so let's just stop talking about her, okay? Sam sighed and looked around. So where do you sleep? On the couch, I answered. You're not gonna do that all the time, right? I'm clearing out the other room, I answered. Good, he said. Now, what happened with Lucifer? Oh my god, you won't believe. Then I told him about our first interaction. The next day, when we went to the yoga class, Chris was sitting on a chair in the corner. Throughout the session, he guided students to do this or that, and Sam and I looked at each other suspiciously. Is everything alright? I asked Chris when it was break time. Yeah, I'm fine, he patted his thigh. Just had a rough night. I furrowed my brows in worry. Rough? He smiled and looked away. Lucifer, he said, then cleared his throat. Oh fuck, blushed and excused myself. Well, that was both awkward and embarrassing. This is why they told us not to butt in when we weren't invited. I could dig myself a hole right this second. When Sam asked what happened, I showed him a middle finger first, then I told him. Instead of laughing, he furrowed his eyebrows too. What happened? I asked. How the hell is his left foot bruised then? Huh? Sam nodded at Chris's left foot. We watched Chris be extra careful with his foot. What do you think caused that? I don't know, Sam answered. But when we looked at each other, only one name came into our minds. This is actually nice, Chris said when I showed him the open space. It was 3 weeks after that mini observation Sam and I had made. We never confirmed our doubts, but we always assumed that it was Lucifer. That man just reeked of violence, hatred, and toxic masculinity. But Chris never said anything, and we didn't try to cross our boundaries. And after that, nothing of that kind ever happened again. Today, Lucifer told him that he wouldn't be able to pick him up, so I brought him to the open space that I was planning to buy. It was with the hope that it would increase my income and better my lifestyle. My parents suggested I start a clothing business here. The surrounding area was often filled with customers from different backgrounds. But, Chris said and walked further into the room, I think it would be more profitable if you start something else. Oh, I said curiously. Like what? Beverage, he began. A coffee shop would do so good. A bakery would be amazing. He pressed his hand on the wall and looked around as if imagining what it would look like. You know, owning a coffee shop has always been my dream. Well, at least since my mom had to sell hers 15 years ago. He turned to me. I'd like to see you handle one. I smiled. Coffee shop. And that made sense. I noted down the suggestion and brushed away any insecurity that Chris had about speaking too much. I'm glad you suggested that. I'll think about it further, thank you. He smiled and grinned. Do you want to do some shopping? Yeah, I told Lucifer I'd bring him something warm for the winter. And well, you're his size, so would you mind helping? I will, I answered, even though the comparison pissed me off. How are you coping with everything? Chris asked, clearly indicating my breakup. Though he was speaking softly, I still looked around to see if anyone was listening. But everyone seemed busy with their stuff, so I turned and gave him an answer. Well, it's actually a lot better than it was then. Lizzie's stopped calling me, so I guess that's a good sign. Mom and Dad are actually relieved that it ended. Sam, well, he actually threw me a party 2 weeks into the breakup. Oh, nice, he said and grabbed a coat. But I'm asking about you. Me? I asked. I feel better. I sleep a lot better, and I no longer feel uncomfortable and out of place walking into my own home. He looked at me for a second and then smiled. Good. Here, can you check this one for me? He gave me the coat and I tried it right there. Okay, he said and asked me to turn around. Then he pressed his hand on my shoulder blades and then my arms. All right, thank you. It feels super soft, I said. The material's nice. Yeah, I'm gonna buy it. Then we went into another section and he looked at a few turtlenecks and Henleys. He grabbed one Henley and checked its material. Do you need me to try that as well? I asked. I was almost ready to do it, but Chris then shook his head with a little laugh. There's no need, I know his size. He smiled and grabbed one of his husband's sizes. I sighed. There went my chance. Should we go and eat something? Chris asked, and looked at his watch. I'll have to return home soon. Yeah, sure. On our drive back to his place, Chris asked me a bunch of random questions, and I did the same, and soon, we were discussing things with each other that we were sure we wouldn't have under any other circumstance. The air around us got so smooth and soft that when I parked my car outside his place, it went silent. It was a silence charged with something akin to passion, and when I stupidly stretched out my hand to hold his fingers, he let me. Then we looked at each other. A moment later, we leaned closer to kiss. But before we could do so, the lights on Chris's porch were switched on. He immediately separated, looked at me with wide and fearful eyes, and immediately got out of my car. He didn't even say goodbye. With my heart still pounding erratically in my chest, I drove towards my home. After that, I didn't really see Chris again. Not until days later, at least. At the next yoga class, someone other than Chris walked into the room. But we were used to Chris taking a few days off every so often, so we weren't really surprised that much. Well, that was for others. For me, it was something else entirely. The last time I saw Chris, we had nearly kissed. So that was another set of badgering emotions for me. And then there was the question of whether or not he was fine. As Sam pointed out to me, whenever Chris took a leave, he almost always returned with a new set of bruises, or even broken bones. What was it going to be this time? My months of silence on this matter just made it worse. If I had asked the right question at the right time, maybe then I wouldn't be worrying about Chris right now. What if Lucifer had seen us? What if Lucifer had seen us? I asked Sam over lunch. What if he'd seen you guys almost kissing? Well, he probably would have beat you to a pulp by now. He crossed his arms over the table and looked into my eyes. What? I asked. We know if Lucifer's angry right now. He's probably gonna hurt Chris. And don't try to deny me. We both know how nasty that man is. I took a deep breath. He shouldn't. He wouldn't, I said. And what if he has? He jabbed his finger into my chest. You're responsible. We decided to wait a few more days. This was the longest Chris had been missing. 2 days later, Sam and I were out grocery shopping when we saw Chris. He wasn't obvious right away as he'd bundled in layers and layers of sweaters and jackets. He was wearing a hat and a mask. If we didn't know how he walked and moved, we would have surely missed him. Sam nudged me. I gave him our cart and slowly walked towards Chris. When he saw me, he looked a little surprised and spooked. He tried to ignore me, but when he saw I wouldn't leave, he sighed, looked around us, and then removed his hat. He didn't remove his mask, which I observed. Hi, I said. He waved a little in response. You weren't coming to classes, and I wondered why. Been busy, he replied, and dropped item after item in the cart. The list was sitting carelessly in his hand. He looked like he couldn't care less about what he wanted and what he didn't. Most of all, he looked exhausted and pissed off. I hoped it wasn't at me. Lucifer's been on fucking edge and I wanted to apologize, I said. About what? He asked and finally turned to me. About the kiss, I answered with a little shame. I hoped his husband wasn't around. But we didn't kiss, he pointed out, and even if we had, would you have regretted it? Wouldn't you have only done that if you wanted it? His line of questioning troubled me. I was attracted to Chris, and there wasn't the least bit of doubt about it. In fact, I could recall the day when I first got distracted by him. It was a watershed moment for me, and months old. I was so attracted to him that I didn't even fully feel the burn of my breakup. I broke up with Lizzie and I got over it smoothly. Well, not exactly smoothly, but easily. Even then, I wasn't sure what to answer him. Anyway, Lucifer's a little weird right now, that's all, and I'll have to deal with that. And then I will return. Is that all you wanted to know? No, I said. I want to know if you're okay. He stopped a second, as if contemplating whether he should say something or not. Yes, he finally said. I'm fine, thank you for asking. Before I could say anything, he moved away a little and stopped in front of the same shelf that weeks ago I'd helped him with. He grabbed the olive oil bottle himself this time, but there were other details that I couldn't help but notice. First, because of the movement, his short jeans had ridden up a little bit. There was a bruise as fresh and red as a new wound could be. The second was the little wince he let out at the movement. He knew that I noticed it. "Don't tell anyone about it," he pleaded. "Is that because of that?" I knew it. Lucifer had seen us close that day, and he had hurt Chris, and that was why Chris wasn't coming to classes. All of that, plus the wound and the wince, made sense now. Guilt filled me, and so did anger and hatred. "No," Chris said, but we both knew that was a lie. "Is that why you're hiding your face?" I asked. When I stepped a little closer, he unconsciously touched his mask. "He's here," he whispered, "somewhere around. Let's not get too close." He then turned and grabbed a few more items before moving to leave this section. I followed after him. "So all of that is because of me?" "No, none of it's because of you," he answered. "It's because he's an asshole, and I'm sick and tired of him," he hissed, and a few tears escaped his eyes. "But you'll have to make some distance now. He'll hit you too." "And I'll hit him back," I replied and stepped closer. "Liam," Chris said, "he's a bad man, and I've experienced that firsthand. Why didn't you call anyone?" "I don't have my phone or anything on me," he said. "And how do you think I could have done that?" "He has them?" I asked, baffled now. "Who else would have it, Liam?" he asked, a little tiredly now. "Chris," I said, and stepped a little closer. "Look, I think I know." Then suddenly I was pulled away from him and shoved away. A few people around us jumped in surprise. I looked up to find Lucifer hovering over me, and Chris by his side, doing his best to stop him. "What part of staying away from someone else's husband do you need to be taught?" He growled and brought a foot down on my left knee. I howled in pain. I hadn't seen that coming until it had come, and I was pretty sure he'd broken a few bones. I just hoped I wouldn't end up with a useless leg. "Lucifer, stop!" Chris said, but the man seemed adamant about showing off his anger. Without giving me a chance or space to move, he punched me some more and then kicked me some more as well. It wasn't until Chris slammed a bottle of olive oil on his neck and Sam called the police that he stopped. Later, Sam told me it was Chris whom they had to pull away because he wouldn't stop hitting Lucifer. As much as I wanted to think it was a good thing, I was worried for him too. I was discharged from the hospital after they stitched me up a little and asked me to be extra careful on my left leg. Lucifer hadn't broken it, but it wasn't well either. Chris was waiting outside when I saw him. He smiled at me and waved with his good hand. His other hand was bandaged. "Hey, you look like shit," he commented. "Yeah, I fought a battle," I played along. "A battle that wasn't even yours," he said carefully, "but hey, thanks for standing up for me. You didn't look like you really needed one." Chris shrugged. "I wouldn't have done that, but Dad saw me like that and He stopped. I felt ashamed and embarrassed. Years ago, when I came out to him, he called me a stupid little boy. He said I'd never be happy, and then he saw me like that, beaten and bruised, and I felt this intense hatred for Lucifer. I told myself the only reason I feel defeated in front of my dad is because of this man, and I just felt pissed off, He stopped. "So he did hurt you," I said, observing the bruises on his face now. "And then I met you. I used to think he wouldn't lift his hand on anyone but me, but that man went a step ahead to prove me wrong. Liam, I'm so sorry for the state you're in. If I'd been a little braver, none of this would have ever happened." "I don't blame you for anything," I softly said. "I know that you never will," he wrung his hands together, "but I still owe you." "You don't owe me anything," I said. Then I playfully nudged him. "Except maybe helping me set up that coffee shop." "You're really gonna do that?" he asked. "If you want to," I said. "It's gonna be awesome, Liam, I can promise you that much." "I know," I replied. Then I stopped to stare at him for a moment. "Hey, are you alright?" He moved his head to nod, but then shook it in the end. No, but I will be." "Yeah, you will be." We planned to report Lucifer only for the violence at the supermarket. The owners were setting up their own cases, but it wasn't until we reached the police station that Chris said he wanted to file a case against Lucifer for domestic violence as well. "I will start working on divorce soon," he added. "I'm right here," I told him. "I know," he nodded. "Listen, the coat I bought that day for... Would you like to have it?" he asked and reminded me of that day's shopping. "Yeah, of course." "Let's go home then," he said. "Dinner's on me." "Oh, great," I grinned. It was far from our great start, but Honestly, I could see us going on dates and spending a lot more time together when we were both healed, and I couldn't wait for that day anymore. We did end up going on a few dates after that. The first one happened at Chris's place when we suddenly decided we needed to watch a horror movie to pass the time. I arranged the setting, and Chris brought in all the snacks and stuff. There was a lot of screaming and howling laughter before we ended up sleeping like that right there. And thankfully, when we woke up the next day, it wasn't awkward between us. And after that, it was easier to go on dates. We didn't exactly call them as much, but we knew what they were. Slowly, my coffee shop came into being as well. Instead of continuing with his yoga classes, Chris decided to handle the shop for me. Hence, our relationship worked even better from then on. Obviously, the nightmares didn't look like they would stop anytime soon. As much as I hated to admit it, I knew Lucifer had left a long-lasting impact on Chris. Even after their messy divorce, Chris was still feeling the heat of their relationship. Sam, well, he loved us a little too much for his own good. The end. Dealing with an abused person is clearly not easy. What kind of things went wrong when you tried to help someone out of their abusive relationship? Thanks for watching, and consider subscribing to become a part of our Rainbow Force. And stay wholesome.